In the heart of West Africa, the nation of Burkina Faso is silently unraveling, caught in the grip of a devastating crisis that rarely makes global headlines. Once celebrated for its vibrant culture and relative stability in a turbulent region, the country is now a landscape of fear and uncertainty. A relentless insurgency, fueled by extremist ideologies and local grievances, has pushed the state to the very edge of collapse. The daily reality for millions of its citizens is a struggle for survival against a backdrop of constant violence, displacement, and a humanitarian catastrophe that just keeps deepening with each passing day. This is not a distant, abstract conflict. It is a human tragedy unfolding in real time, with profound implications for the stability of the entire Sahel region and beyond. The situation has deteriorated at an alarming pace, transforming vast swaths of the country into no-go zones where the government's authority has all but vanished. The military junta that seized power with promises of restoring security has found itself overwhelmed by an enemy that is both adaptable and deeply entrenched. The violence has become more sophisticated, the attacks more audacious, and the civilian death toll has climbed to staggering heights. As a result, the social fabric of Burkina Faso is tearing apart at the seams, leaving communities shattered and a generation of children without access to education or basic healthcare, their futures stolen by a war they did not choose. Understanding the crisis in Burkina Faso is crucial because it serves as a stark warning about the fragility of states facing modern insurgencies. The conflict is a complex tapestry woven from threads of religious extremism, geopolitical maneuvering, ethnic tensions, and the desperate poverty that makes young men vulnerable to the promises of armed groups. The international community has struggled to respond effectively, its traditional approaches rendered obsolete by a new political reality in the Sahel, where military governments are turning away from Western partners. The world's attention may be focused elsewhere, but the silent suffering in Burkina Faso demands our focus and our compassion. This essay will explore the multifaceted crisis engulfing Burkina Faso as of August 2025. We will examine the main armed groups driving the violence, recount the major attacks that have defined the conflict this year, and illustrate the devastating humanitarian consequences for ordinary people. We will also delve into the underlying causes of the fighting, the shifting regional alliances, and the international community's response. Finally, we will provide guidance on how to stay informed and offer support to those caught in the crossfire. The story of Burkina Faso is a story of resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship, and it is a story that needs to be told. The violence sweeping across Burkina Faso is not the work of a single monolithic entity, but rather a network of interconnected and sometimes competing armed groups. The most dominant and influential of these is Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, more commonly known as JNIM. As an official affiliate of Al-Qaeda, JNIM has a clear extremist agenda, but its strength lies in its ability to embed itself within local communities. It skillfully exploits existing grievances over poverty, injustice, and state neglect to recruit fighters and build support networks. JNIM is not just an invading force. It has become a part of the local landscape in many areas, offering a brutal but functional alternative to a state that has long been absent. Another significant player in this deadly theater is the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, or ISGS. While it shares a similar jihadist ideology with JNIM, ISGS is an affiliate of the Islamic State and often acts as a rival. The two groups have clashed over territory and resources, but they have also been known to cooperate on major operations, blurring the lines for those on the ground. ISGS is known for its extreme brutality, often targeting civilians in a bid to terrorize populations into submission. Alongside these major international franchises is Ansarul Islam, a homegrown movement that was one of the first to take up arms in northern Burkina Faso, further complicating the web of actors. The tactics of these groups have evolved dramatically over the past few years. What began as hit-and-run guerrilla attacks in remote border areas has morphed into sophisticated large-scale assaults on military bases and major towns. Insurgents now deploy advanced weaponry, including drones and anti-aircraft guns, and have demonstrated the capacity to overrun well-defended government positions. Their strategy often involves laying siege to towns, cutting off supply routes, and destroying infrastructure like bridges and communication towers. This blockade tactic is designed to isolate communities, starve them into submission, and create humanitarian crises that the state is powerless to solve. In response to the insurgency, the government has increasingly relied on state-sanctioned civilian militias known as the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, or VDPs. These hastily trained and lightly armed volunteers are intended to supplement the overstretched army, but their presence has often made a bad situation worse. Accused of carrying out extrajudicial killings and targeting specific ethnic groups, particularly the Fulani, the VDPs have fueled a cycle of retaliatory violence. Their actions have deepened communal mistrust and in many cases have become a powerful recruitment tool for the very jihadist groups they are meant to be fighting. The year 2025 has been marked by a series of audacious and deadly attacks that underscore the escalating capabilities of armed groups and the precariousness of the state's position. One of the most significant assaults occurred on March 28 in the eastern town of Diapaga. In a coordinated attack, JNIM militants targeted military and VDP positions, overwhelming them with superior numbers and firepower. The battle raged for hours, and when the dust settled, at least 63 soldiers and militiamen had been killed. The attackers looted significant amounts of weapons and vehicles before retreating, leaving the town and its defenders reeling from the blow and demonstrating their ability to strike deep within government-held territory. Just a few weeks later, another major attack shook the country. On May 11th, JNIM launched a massive assault on the northern town of Jibo, a strategic hub that had been under a crippling jihadist blockade for years. The militants simultaneously struck the military camp, police stations, and gendarmerie posts, systematically dismantling the town's security apparatus. The scale of the attack was unprecedented, with reports indicating at least 100 people were killed. The insurgents briefly occupied the town, looting military hardware including machine gun-mounted pickup trucks, before the army could mount a counter-offensive. The fall of Jibo, even temporarily, sent a shockwave across Burkina Faso. The violence continued unabated with another brutal attack in the province of Bulsa, targeting a military base in the village of Dargo. A force of approximately 100 presumed JNM fighters descended on the facility, killing around 50 soldiers in a fierce firefight. As in other recent attacks, the primary goal appeared to be the acquisition of military equipment. The militants successfully looted the base before melting back into the countryside, further depleting the army's resources and morale. Each of these attacks serves as a grim milestone, highlighting a clear strategic shift by insurgents from rural harassment to direct large-scale confrontations aimed at breaking the back of the Burkinabe military. The impact of these major attacks extends far beyond the immediate casualties and loss of equipment. They have a profound psychological effect on both the security forces and the civilian population, eroding confidence in the government's ability to protect its citizens. For soldiers on the front lines, the fear of being overrun in isolated and undersupplied bases is constant. For civilians, these events confirm that no town is truly safe, accelerating displacement as people flee areas they believe will be the next target. The onslaught of 2025 has shattered any remaining illusions that the military junta's hardline approach is succeeding in turning the tide of the war. The relentless advance of armed groups has led to a dramatic and visible fracturing of the Burkinabe state. While official government figures are often optimistic, independent analysts and humanitarian organizations paint a starkly different picture of territorial control. As of mid-2025, it is estimated that approximately 60% of Burkina Faso's territory lies outside of effective government control. This does not mean that every village in this vast area is permanently occupied by insurgents, but rather that the state is absent. There are no police, no judges, no schools, and no clinics. In these zones, armed groups operate with impunity, imposing their own brutal form of law. This loss of control is most acute in the regions bordering Mali and Niger, particularly in the Sahel and Est regions, but the violence has now metastasized to affect nearly every part of the country. Even areas in the west and south, once considered safe havens, are now experiencing regular attacks. The government's presence is often confined to provincial capitals and major towns, which increasingly resemble besieged islands in a sea of insecurity. These urban centers are connected by perilous roads where army convoys and civilian travelers are subject to frequent ambushes and improvised explosive devices, making travel a life-or-death gamble. A key strategy used by jihadist groups to consolidate their control is the blockade. More than 40 towns and localities across the country are currently under siege, effectively cut off from the rest of the world. In these locations, home to over 1 million people, insurgents control all entry and exit points, preventing the flow of food, medicine, and other essential goods. The goal is to make life so unbearable that the population either flees or submits to their rule. Humanitarian aid cannot reach these trapped populations, and military attempts to break the blockades with armed convoys are costly and often result in heavy casualties. The reality on the ground is that Burkina Faso is now a country with two competing forms of governance. In the cities, the military government tries to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but its authority stops at the city limits. In the vast rural hinterlands, it is the armed groups that levy taxes, dispense justice, and regulate daily life. This de facto partition of the country represents the single greatest existential threat to Burkina Faso as a unified nation. The state is not just losing a war, it is losing its very territory, and with it, its connection to millions of its own citizens who are now forced to live under militant rule. Behind the strategic maps and casualty counts lies a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. The most visible consequence of the violence is the massive internal displacement crisis. As of early 2025, more than 2 million people have been forced to flee their homes, abandoning their farms, their villages, and, honestly, their entire way of life. This number continues to climb with every attack, with nearly 100,000 new displacements recorded in the first quarter of the year alone. These internally displaced persons, or IDPs, often flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs, seeking refuge in overcrowded camps, or host communities that are already stretched to their absolute limit. The struggle for food has become a central feature of daily life for a huge portion of the population. The conflict has decimated agriculture, as farmers are unable to safely access their fields and herders can no longer move their livestock. Combined with the blockades of major towns, this has created a severe food security crisis. An estimated 2.7 million people required emergency food assistance during the 2024 lean season, and, well, the numbers for 2025 are expected to be even worse. Malnutrition rates, especially among children trapped in besieged areas, are soaring. The government's ban on cash-based aid has further complicated efforts by humanitarian groups to deliver assistance effectively. The violence has also triggered a near-total collapse of public services in conflict-affected regions. The education system is in ruins, with over 5,000 schools closed as of late 2024, depriving more than 800,000 children of their right to learn. Schools are often targeted directly by armed groups who view them as symbols of the Western-style state, or they are abandoned as teachers and students flee the violence. Similarly, the healthcare system has crumbled. By September 2024, over 400 health facilities had been forced to shut down, cutting off more than 4 million people from even the most basic medical care, from vaccinations to emergency treatment. The sheer scale of the violence against civilians is horrifying. Since the military took power in September 2022, over 17,000 people have been killed in the conflict. In 2024 alone, ASLED recorded over 7,500 fatalities. One of the most horrific single events in the country's history occurred in August 2024, when jihadists massacred over 600 civilians near the town of Barcelona. These are not just statistics, they are farmers, mothers, and children whose lives have been brutally cut short. The unrelenting violence has left deep psychological scars on the survivors, creating a traumatized population living in a constant state of fear and grief. The conflict in Burkina Faso cannot be explained by religious extremism alone. Its roots run deep into the soil of long-standing local grievances. For decades, communities in the northern and eastern borderlands felt abandoned by the central government in Ouagadougou. They suffered from a lack of economic opportunities, poor access to education and justice, and perceived corruption among state officials. This sense of marginalization and injustice created fertile ground for jihadist recruiters, who arrived promising to overthrow a corrupt system and establish a more righteous order. They offered a sense of purpose and a source of income to young men with few other prospects. This volatile mix has been dangerously inflamed by rising ethnic tensions, which are both a cause and a consequence of the conflict. The Fulani, a traditionally semi-nomadic pastoralist community spread across the Sahel, have been disproportionately targeted and stigmatized. Because some jihadist leaders are Fulani, and the groups recruit heavily from the community, state security forces and rival ethnic militias have often engaged in collective punishment, accusing all Fulani of being terrorist sympathizers. This profiling has led to mass arrests, disappearances, and brutal massacres of Fulani civilians, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy as alienated and victimized individuals turn to armed groups for protection. A particularly egregious example of this cycle of violence occurred in March 2025. Near the town of Solenzo, state-backed VDP militiamen and army soldiers were accused of killing over 130 Fulani civilians in a reprisal attack. Such atrocities do not defeat the insurgency, they fuel it. Every time a community is unjustly targeted by state-aligned forces, it erodes trust in the government and serves as a powerful recruitment narrative for JNIM and ISGS. The jihadists present themselves as the defenders of persecuted communities, drawing new fighters into their ranks and ensuring the conflict will continue for years to come. The war is increasingly being fought along ethnic lines. The government's heavy-handed military-first strategy has only exacerbated these problems. By arming ethnic militias like the VDPs and failing to hold its own forces accountable for abuses, the state is perceived by many not as a protector, but as a predator. The conflict has fractured the social contract between the Burkinabe state and many of its citizens, especially in rural areas. Without a political strategy that addresses the root causes of the conflict, injustice, poverty, and ethnic discrimination, military operations alone are doomed to fail. The war in Burkina Faso is as much a battle for hearts and minds as it is a battle for territory. In response to the escalating crisis and growing international isolation, Burkina Faso has radically reoriented its foreign policy. In late 2023, the military juntas in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, all of which came to power through coups, formed the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. This pact began as a mutual defense agreement promising that an attack on one member would be considered an attack on all. It has since evolved into a deeper confederation, with plans for economic and political integration. The AES countries have also created a 5,000-strong joint military force, though its effectiveness in reversing the security decline remains to be seen. This new regional bloc has defined itself in opposition to both its West African neighbors and its former Western partners. The AES countries formally withdrew from the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, viewing the regional body as a tool of foreign interests. A central pillar of this so-called sovereignist shift has been the expulsion of French military forces, which had been leading counter-terrorism efforts in the region for nearly a decade. The Burkinabe junta, led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has been particularly vocal in its anti-French rhetoric, blaming the country's former colonizer for its security failures while cracking down on domestic media and civil society. As ties with the West have frayed, Burkina Faso has turned to new international partners for support. Russia has become a key political ally, providing diplomatic cover and propaganda support, although the junta has remained cautious about a large-scale deployment of Russian mercenaries like the Wagner Group. More significant has been the deepening military cooperation with Turkey, which has become a major supplier of armed drones and other military hardware. This pivot allows the junta to acquire the weapons it needs for its war effort without the human rights conditions that often come with Western military aid, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of the Sahel. The response from the European Union and the United States has been disjointed and uncertain. Following the coups, the EU and its member states froze direct budget support and ended most security and military cooperation missions. Humanitarian aid continues, but it has been reoriented to bypass central government authorities, focusing instead on community-level projects. Western powers are struggling to find a new strategy that balances their security interests with their commitment to democracy and human rights. They are faced with a stark choice: engage with the military juntas on pragmatic terms, or risk ceding all influence in a strategically vital region to rivals like Russia and Turkey. The protracted conflict has caused a catastrophic decay of the essential services that form the foundation of a functional society. For millions of Burkinabe, especially those living outside the main urban centers, daily life has become an exhausting exercise in survival where the most basic necessities are no longer guaranteed. The state's retreat from vast territories means that the institutions responsible for health, education, and sanitation have simply vanished, leaving a vacuum that is filled only by violence and despair. This collapse of public services is one of the most tragic and enduring consequences of the war, creating a lost generation and sowing the seeds of future instability. The impact on education has been particularly devastating. Armed groups have systematically targeted the school system, which they see as a symbol of the secular state and Western influence. Teachers have been threatened, kidnapped, and killed, while schools have been looted and burned to the ground. As a result, an entire generation of children is growing up without any formal education. The closure of over 5,000 schools has pushed more than 800,000 children out of the classroom, making them more vulnerable to child labor, early marriage, and recruitment by the very armed groups that destroyed their schools in the first place. Access to healthcare has become a life-or-death lottery. With hundreds of health centers closed or destroyed, millions of people have no access to doctors, nurses, or medicine. Preventable diseases are making a comeback, and maternal and infant mortality rates are climbing. A simple infection or a complicated childbirth can easily become a death sentence. The psychological toll of living under constant threat, witnessing horrific violence, and losing loved ones has also created a massive mental health crisis. Yet there are virtually no services available to help people cope with the profound trauma they have endured, leaving wounds that will fester for decades. The economy, already fragile, has been shattered. The conflict has destroyed livelihoods on a massive scale. Farmers cannot plant or harvest their crops, and herders have lost their livestock to theft or disease. Local markets, once the vibrant heart of community life, have been shut down by blockades or fear of attack. The destruction of infrastructure like roads and bridges has severed economic links, isolating communities and making it impossible to transport goods. This economic collapse deepens poverty and desperation, further fueling the grievances that armed groups exploit and making a return to peace even more difficult to achieve. The crisis in Burkina Faso may seem distant and overwhelming, but staying informed and offering support is both possible and critically important. The first step is to seek out reliable and nuanced information. Mainstream news coverage can be sporadic, so it is helpful to follow the work of organizations that provide in-depth analysis and on-the-ground reporting. Sources like the International Crisis Group, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, and Human Rights Watch offer detailed reports and regular updates on the security situation, political dynamics, and human rights abuses committed by all sides of the conflict. For a clearer picture of the humanitarian situation, the websites of United Nations agencies are invaluable. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs provides comprehensive overviews of humanitarian needs, funding gaps, and operational challenges through its Relief web portal. The World Food Programme and UNICEF offer specific insights into food insecurity and the impact on children respectively. Following these organizations on social media can also provide real-time updates and personal stories that help humanize the staggering statistics and bring the reality of the crisis closer to home. While the challenges are immense, it is possible to provide direct help to those affected by the crisis. Donating to reputable international humanitarian organizations that have a proven track record of working in difficult conflict zones is one of the most effective ways to make a difference. Groups like Doctors Without Borders, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and Mercy Corps are on the front lines, delivering life-saving medical care, food, and clean water to displaced and vulnerable populations. Even small contributions can help provide essential aid to a family that has lost everything. Ultimately, the crisis in Burkina Faso is a profound test of our shared humanity. The country is trapped in a devastating storm of violence, displacement, and state collapse. The military junta's strategy has failed to provide security, while its pivot away from traditional partners has complicated international aid efforts. Millions of people are caught in the middle, their lives shattered and their futures uncertain. The path to peace will be long and difficult, requiring not just a new security strategy, but a political solution that addresses the root causes of the conflict. For the sake of the people of Burkina Faso, the world cannot afford to look away.